So I think I left off with the recap or what I had done and the explanation on what is this episode 24 and 25. I think were the last ones, and mentioned that the guy RC who's doing all these videos that kind of walked me through all this stuff said that we were going to do some stuff with I don't know, acceleration and velocity and making the map work a little bit better. Um, Apparently it didn't happen. It seems like he went away for a couple years or something and didn't do any videos. And then when he started making videos again, didn't go in the direction that he was going to go before then. So some of the collision stuff is still a little goofy in the game. But I did his two of the last three videos. I didn't watch the last one and do it yet because all it was doing was a different way to resize the game. Like what I mean by resizing it is now if I make the screen bigger, the game matches the size of the screen. So how I have it resized right now and what he walked me through was just resizing the canvas, essentially making the whole box that it goes in a little bit bigger. There's another way to do it, which is kind of making your image zoom in or zoom out, so the pixels get bigger or smaller depending on the screen. And he did suggest that that's kind of a better way to do it than what I have right now. Because if you're playing this game, like if this game was able to be played on a phone, which it couldn't be because it uses the keyboard and the mouse, not a touch screen. If you used the smaller screen like a phone, you would have a disadvantage compared to my full screen here, because if I make this about as small as I can't really see that far. I can't see these enemies way up here. I can't see that there's a rock or an enemy pretty close to me or anything like that. It's just a smaller view if you have a smaller screen. So that gives someone with a big screen an advantage because they can see more. So I can see literally the whole map from left to right, at least on that particular spot. So I hadn't done that one yet, but well, the game itself is pretty much functioning at this point. There's some goofiness with collisions and whatnot, but I kind of went rogue after the last video and did some of my own things that I had been hoping would happen, but didn't in the video. So one of those is actually the fact that the enemy bullets now look different. So I found a PNG image on Google search and slapped it in the game. So now I can tell that I want to avoid the red ones, and it's the blue ones that are mine, or purple, whatever color those are. I also kind of messed around with the percent chance of finding different upgrades. So I think before it was just a 50-50 shot of getting a yellow upgrade or a blue upgrade. So the yellow upgrades actually make your attack speed, the speed that you shoot bullets, faster. The blue ones, if you notice, are going to make my score go up by 1,000. Okay. And there's actually a third upgrade now too. Because another thing that one of the videos did, and besides just resizing the map, was go over how to make an inventory system for so far just the player, but like you can get things. I don't have a massive diversity of items that you can get. Right now it's just potions that are built into the game, which will restore your health. Hey, look at that, a potion. And what we notice when I get that potion, if I don't die, is it pops up down here. There's a button on the bottom left, and if I click it, it uses that potion. It makes one of them go away, and it brought my health to 10, but apparently I got hit 3 times after that. Okay, another thing I did is, if we notice right now, is my score 29,000. So I think the bees will have, okay, they have 2 hit points. I made a simple leveling up, I guess you might call it, function for the enemies. So at the beginning, the bats had 2 hit points, and the bees had 1. If you notice now, it's based on my score. So if I shoot 1 bullet at the bat, it's still there. Yikes. In other words, I can look up the actual numbers. I think it's 5,000 or 7,500. Every 7,500 points or 5,000, the bat gains 1 HP. Every 15,000, the bee gains 1 HP. So kind of upping your score levels you up or levels the enemies up a little bit. Wow, getting lucky with potions. Those are only a 2% chance of finding those apparently. So every 2 frames out of 100 is roughly how often you're going to find them. Right. What else did I do? Oh, the high score. Before, when you died, it sent the score, like how long you survived, to the game console, which is one of the tools over here. Let me actually pause this. Remember, you can pause it. More tools. If you go to developer tools on any web page, from what I understand, you can see the HTML that goes along with it or any of the files. So when I do that, it sent something to the console log that said, hey, you still failing at that, isn't it? That you died, but unless you were in here, it wouldn't tell you anything specific. Sorry, I'm just trying to figure out if this is the new version or not. If I go to JS, because it has this failure to load error, so I'm trying to figure out if it actually has my new code in it or not. Where are upgrades? Enemy would work. Where's the randomly generate? B for 7,500. Yeah, that's the new stuff. It just has a weird error for some reason. Are the upgrades new? Okay. Generate. Should be new. Okay. Where are... Okay. Sorry. I was having issues with the new changes they made yesterday uploading to this probably sketchy web or URL thing that no one really uses. It was called Drive to Web. So I'm actually hosting my game on Google Drive, and it creates this really random URL address and points to my stuff on my Google Drive. This is like how probably no one really uses Google Drive for web hosting because it's kind of goofy and you can't make your own URL, meaning like www. Like this would be a better URL, but I didn't want to pay for a URL to host one little tiny game. So I tried to find a free way to do it using Google Drive. And it works okay, but obviously it's got some issues still too. Okay, so I've paused the game. If I close this down, why did it all go away though? Okay, I guess it did. So let's take a look at some of these things here. So the inventory system was the first thing that we did, and that's actually a different file. So we had a file for kind of just game workings, the maps. You should probably actually take the maps and put them in their own file would be what I feel like would be the best thing to do, but it didn't happen. We have inventory here though, so really all you need for an inventory is a function to add an item, remove an item, figure out if you have an item or not. So that kind of returns true or false. And then to refresh the inventory interface, like what it looks like for us, it just looked like a little button in the bottom corner that said, "Hey, you had a potion." Right. And then you can create items, and what this does is it gives every item an ID, a name, and an event. So this is actually something that I haven't done before in any of my coding. I haven't done object programming too much. I did a little bit in my Java class. I've done quite a bit more in this game. But when you create an object like a potion or an enemy or things like that, so far all I've done with it is store like a property that doesn't do anything itself. But this event function here, if you notice down here when I create my potion, I give it an ID called potion. I give it the name that displays, so I capitalize the P to make it a little bit fancier, I guess. But then I can also store a custom function in this item. So if I make a function here and then I say that what this function does is it makes the player HP 10 and then it removes the item, one of them, one potion from the inventory. So whenever I call item.list and I give it the ID of potion and I say function or event, actually, event, because that's what it's called, it's going to run this custom function here. And if I create another item, which I actually don't use in the game because I kind of found it goofy, but oh well, he had me make a randomly generate function for an enemy. So whenever you click that, it's going to randomly generate an enemy. It doesn't remove itself. So you could click that button incessantly and make as many enemies as you wanted. I just didn't actually what he did. He made this whole system and then you had to literally go into the console and type in create a potion. So he didn't create any functionality for an item to be generated or there. So we wrote all this stuff, and because we never did, where do we do that? In entities and upgrades. Because we never actually called anything, we never said, hey, make a potion. You can have all the code in the world, but if the game doesn't actually say make a potion somehow, it's never going to. Even though that code is there and it works, you just have to actually call it or use it for it to work. So where I called it is right here. And this is one of the things I kind of tweaked a lot. Before it was just 2 upgrades and it was a 50-50 chance of getting either one. So now if your random value, I just had a math.random, that gives me a number between 0 and 1. So if that number is under 20 or 0.2, which is 20%, you're going to make an attack speed upgrade. So they're not as common as they used to be. If you're between 0.2 and 0.98 or 20% and 98%, you're going to make a score upgrade, which is the blue one, and that makes your score go up by 1,000. And then this is where I actually created the potion itself. So I create a potion, the category is potion. The image I use is image.potion, and it only happens above 98 or 98%, 99%, and probably 100%. So I guess 3% chance that it happens if the 100 is in there. Okay, so then I go through the upgrade, which is up above, sorry. I give it the image, I give it the category, and then this is where I actually figure out what it's going to do. The score goes up by 1,000. If it's a score, your attack speed goes up by 0.2. I also bumped that way down because before you could get about 3 upgrades and you had like a machine gun. So I lowered that because I was trying to make the game a good balance of, doesn't get too easy at some point, and it gets more challenging as you go on. So I was tweaking some of these properties to make that a reality. And then this is the thing that was never added in the video. We never actually had a part in our code that said player inventory dot add item, then self dot category is potion. So if the category is potion, I'm going to create a potion, and I'm going to make one of them. Okay. So that's what happens when you collide with a potion item. And it's going to come in here. And what it's going to do for the add item here is it loops through your item list. So your inventory, in other words. And it's going to go from the first item, which is an index of 0. A lot of the time in lists, 0 is actually the first item. Some languages it's going to be 1, but in JavaScript it's 0. So same thing in Java, it's 0 as well. And then it's going to go to the length of the items list. So it's going to go through your whole inventory. And if your first item matches the ID of the item you're trying to add, it means you have it. So you're going to add 1 to that inventory amount. So if I get 2 potions without using them, it's going to add 1 to the original potion to make it have 2. Then I'm going to refresh my render, which means it's going to update and actually show me that I have 2 potions. If I don't do this, if I, take that out, what will happen is you will have 2 potions in your inventory. The computer will know you have 2 potions, but it will not show you that you have 2 potions. In fact, it won't even show you that you have, well, if I take this one out, it won't show you that you even have 1. That button will never show up. So the render pretty much means how are you going to show the player that you have the inventory. The adding item adds it to the computer's memory, but if you don't show it, you're never going to see it. And this is what happens if you already have a potion in your inventory. If you don't have a potion in your inventory, you're going to loop through all of your inventory and never say like potion, the ID is potion. And if an item in inventory is potion, then you run this. But if you don't have a potion, you're going to do this stuff down here. So you're going to, this dot push is how you add something to a list. So you're going to create the ID of potion, and you're going to have the amount be 1. Because when you bump into 1 potion, you should add 1 potion. If you wanted to add 2, you would just change the number in whatever you pass to this function to 2 instead of 1. So, and then it refreshes the render. When we remove an item, we pretty much do a similar thing. We loop through all of the items in our inventory until we find the potion. So when the self.items ID equals potions, and you passed it a potion, you said, I clicked the potion button, I should take away a potion, you're going to subtract the amount. So this minus equals just means subtract whatever this number is, which should be 1 when you click it once, from this amount, and then save that value. That's why the equals is there. I could do the same thing. I don't know if I've explained these that much before. If I did this, it would be the same thing as what I had before. So the new amount equals the old amount, subtract the amount that you told it to take away. But I can just do that with the it's lost writing. Okay. And then how you take away an item from a list is something called splice. So I start at whatever index I'm at, wherever for us, since there's only potions, it's always going to be 0, and then I take away 1. And then I have to refresh my screen, otherwise it wouldn't look like I took away 1, even though the computer knows I did. And then it has item, just loops through and says, do you have an item that says that's called potion? If you do, you're going to return true for you have more than that amount, I guess. if you're seeing how many you have. If you don't have that many, then you return false. And the refresh render, this is where we kind of got back into HTML. HTML, how you know if you're working with HTML, which is a browser or internet site language, is they use these little carets, and ending the slashes here mean the end of the button, and then this means a line break, so it's going to be like hitting the return button on a Google Doc or something like that. So what we did here is we actually the item is going to equal the item ID, so like potion or enemy, I think the other one was called, if I remember correctly from down below. Then on click, what happens on click is you put this items list, it's all in quotes here, so we're actually creating what's called a string in the computer language. And then I ended my quotes right there, but I want to add something that in this case is kind of like a variable or an object property in the computer language here, the program. So this add means concatenate, which is a fancy word for take this text and add it to whatever this is. So you're going to join them together. So if this is potion, which is pretty much the only thing this game uses at this point, instead of item ID, the computer is going to go, well, what is my item ID? And it's potion. So it's going to add this text to this text, what this plus sign does. So it's really this that you're doing. Then it'll pop this in over here, and this is what on click is going to equal when you click a potion button. So what this really does, it's telling the browser when you click this button, you're going to go to the potion item and run the event, the function that we created right down here. So you're going to make the player HP 10 and you're going to remove the potion. Okay, so if I undo that, so then if you have different items, which right now I don't use different items, but let's say we had like a special attack, like an even more special attack, or I created one that lets you pop up an enemy, things like that, you would need it to be kind of general like this because you don't know which item you clicked on. You want the computer to figure that out. Okay. And then we add it to this string here. So button, how I create a button is kind of starting it like this. And then you can create an event is what this is called. So an event is when you click the button, you want it to do something. So on click equals quotes here, and I have to put a slash in front of the quotes because I don't want my string to be done yet. And if I take this out, the computer thinks that this is what I want to have in quotes. When what I really want to do is say I have, this is my text, and I want a double quotes in my text. So I have to tell the computer, hey, let's put a slash here, and that tells the computer that this double quotes right here, I want it to be a double quotes in the text itself. I don't want you to think that this is the end of my characters or text or string. So it's called a break, I think. It says, hey, computer, ignore this quotes. This is what I want to be in my text itself. I don't want you to think this is the end of what I'm telling you to write. I feel like I screwed something up. I did this the wrong way. Not the break. The other slash. Then I shove in this on click thing here so I concatenate it in. So it's going to be item.list, potion in single quotes, dot event. And then I have another break here. I start my next string, my next set of text, but I want to have a double quotes in that text. So I do a break first. And then I put my end button part here. I add in the item name, which would be potion, times self.items.amount. So it's going to display these words. So it'll tell me potion, X, how many potions I have. So if you get one potion, it's going to be potion times 1. If you have 5 potions, it'll be potions times 5. Okay. And then I add in the ending part. So I have to end. HTML always has, for the most part, has you end things like buttons or blocks of text or anything like that. So I end my button, and then I put a line break in. So I return, essentially. So that's something that we haven't done much of in this whole thing. The only HTML we had done up to this point was actually like the very first line or two. We made a canvas, and that was pretty much what our HTML code was. Now I have a couple more things too, and it kind of came about because of this buttons for the inventory. The margin on the body style, what that tells me here is if I change that, it kind of pops down. Like if I don't have that margin of 0, this game is going to be down a little bit. And there's going to be a little gap between the top of the window and where the game starts, which in reality isn't that big of a deal, but we made it 0. And then I created something called a div, which is kind of just a container for things. I'm going to call it the inventory div. And then later on, I will put in that div, I will add into that div, that divider, that container, my buttons. So that's what that kind of has to do there. Now, one thing I had to do for the new game is add in, if you die, you don't keep your potions. So your item, I splice out from 0 to the length of the inventory, so I get rid of everything in your inventory. And then I have to refresh it, because otherwise I would have gotten rid of it, but not said that I got rid of it. It's not displayed that I got rid of it. So that changed there. Okay. And then another thing I did is I actually added in the high score. So before, we didn't really have a high score, so I created a variable called high score. And this is just where it displays. So it updates the high score every time. Where it actually determines the high score, though, is right here. If the high score is less than the score, then your new high score is the current score. So that's how it kind of goes up over time. But the one thing that we know for the high score is right here on a new game, the score gets set to 0, but the high score never gets set to 0. So as long as you're playing and you don't close the tab that you're playing in, your high score is going to be there. Right now, I don't have any way to save high scores or save any properties from game to game. I would imagine that that's a substantial bit more of work and probably includes an actual web hosting service with a database of some sort, but I just didn't do that. I don't have time for that. It'd be worth doing, but I just kind of wanted to get a game out for you guys to play. Now, so I went over the upgrades. Let's go over the enemies here. Okay, so when I randomly generate an enemy, the enemy still has a 50-50 shot of which one's going to be coming up. But before, this was the HP property, and all I did was I took this out, and this is what was there before. I just created a bat that had 2 HP. But now what I do is I'm going to say that the minimum is a 2, but I take the floor, which remember just rounds down an answer, because we'd only want to deal with whole numbers when we're doing HP here. and the score that's on my current game, I divide by 7,500. So if it's under 7,500, let's say it's 5,000, you're going to get some decimal that's lower than 1, and it's going to round it down to 0. So at the beginning of the game, you only have bats that have 2 HP. But the moment your score becomes 7,500, so 7,500 divided by 7,500 is 1. Doesn't have to round down, but if it's 7,600, then it will round down to 1 still. You're going to have bats that have 3 HP. And for bees, since they shoot a little bit faster, I want it to be higher number for when they get HP. So the math.floor, if it's 15,000, then I add 1 HP. If it's 30,000, then I add 2. If it gets up to 45,000, then I'm adding 3 to the 1 here. And that's kind of how I leveled up my enemies, I guess. Made the enemies a little bit tougher as the game went on. Was that chunk right there. So I didn't have to do anything super fancy. In fact, this line was pretty much the same. I just added in something that was going to change this value as the score got higher. Right. What else did I do? The bullets, I changed those. I think bullets are on the bottom though. Okay, so all I did here is before I created my bullet, I ran through a little test here, an if function. So if the combat type that I gave it here was enemy, I created my image variable was going to be the enemy bullet. If it wasn't an enemy, if it was me, the player, then I just used the original bullet image. So that's how I created the difference between the enemy and player bullet. That one wasn't super complicated either. And then, actually, it's in the enemy too. This was probably the thing that I spent the most time on, was this chunk of code right here, right? Yes. It took me a while to get this one to work right. This is one I haven't actually mentioned. So before in the game, he didn't actually go over how to prevent this from happening. The enemies would generate inside of like buildings, and then they couldn't leave the building because it was a wall. They couldn't move, or they would be generated inside of a lake, and then they were stuck in the lake. So how I got around that is I actually created a new function called. No, I actually didn't make the function. It should be made into a function because this was actually the same code was used for the upgrades. So to me, that is you should make a where would we put that in the entity? You should make a function called is it a valid position? Okay. So I just created a variable that said invalid position. I set it to true by default. So that means I'm going to assume that it's an invalid position until I prove that it's valid. It's good. It's not in a building, it's not in a lake, things like that. So what I did here is I used some of the stuff that we had before. So we had math.random times the map's current width. So that gives me a random x anywhere on the map. If I do the same for the y, I went random y anywhere on the map. And then what I do is I have this little if function here that says if this exclamation means not, so it's kind of the opposite. So what I do is maps.current is position wall, and then I pass in the x and y variables here. So I say I'm going to give it an x, and that x is going to be equal to this one right here. I created a y that I'm passing in, and it's going to be equal to this y right here. So I'm testing these two variables. If it is a wall, it's going to return true, I think, but that's not a valid position. If it's a wall, it's not good. So I've made it a not. So if it's not a wall, then the invalid position gets set to false because it's a good place to go. But if it's is a wall, it's not going to change this value. It's going to go down. It's not going to run these because that was some other stuff I did that I don't need for testing purposes. It's going to come down here and it's going to do this section of code while invalid position is true. So as long as I have a position that's not good, it's going to go through and set a new X and Y, test to see if it's a wall. If it is a wall, it's going to do it again. And the moment that I end up with an X and Y that is not in a wall, it gets set to false. And then it's not going to run this loop anymore because it's set to false. And then it'll go through and it'll create everything just like it did before, except it's got good X and Y values now. So that one took a little bit of time. There was some goofiness I had with trying to figure out, did I need a not? Did I need to have these true or false? That kind of stuff. Um, that one was a little bit tricky, but now your enemies and your upgrades don't show up in buildings or rocks or lakes or anything like that. Just by running that, is it valid? Okay. Then I think I have everything figured out here.